All right. Well, you know what we're going to do is we're going to hand the floor over to Evelyn White. So Evelyn is the science communications person for the Nature Conservancy of Hawaii and Palmyra. She has been co-mentoring Jess in her internship experience with TNC, and so I'm going to hand it right over to you, Evelyn.
Well, I don't have prepared words, but I'm going to just say a few things about Jess to give you guys all a sense of, well, you all know who she is, but here's what I think about Jess. My first impression, my first experience of hearing about Jess coming to work for TNC as an intern is that she was going to work on something that was impossible. And so my first impression was like, oh, that's interesting. I'm interested to meet a person who's enthusiastically pursuing a project that can't be done. That sounds like my kind of person. And that's the science side, which I frankly only understand a tiny little manini amount. And she'll share with you that part. That's really what her presentation is about. But and Chad would have gone on and on about what an amazing scientist she is and how incredible her brain works in that way. But the way that I know Jess is different from that, because she's, in addition to doing that work, has been interning with our communications and marketing team and bringing incredible, just graceful, fun ideas to our social media and helping us get organized behind the scenes. And it's a complete joy and pleasure to work with her. And I'm excited to hear about the science part. So I'm sorry I don't have anything more technical to share, but that's what I know Jess to be. And I'm excited to hear her presentation today. I'm sorry, I know Chad would have made it if he could. He just, who knows what happened. But I know he would send his deepest apologies and high praises for Jessica.
Mahalo nui, Evelyn, for jumping in and providing such a sweet introduction. Really appreciate that. So aloha, everyone. My name is Jess, and I'm going to pull up my presentation. Almost forgot to do that. Kind of important. Okay, so today I will be sharing about my internship with the Nature Conservancy Hawaii and Palmyra that I conducted under the mentorship of Chad Wiggins as part of my graduate studies at the University of Hawaii at Hilo, in this talk called Lessons from Palmyra, an interdisciplinary approach to Hawaiian coral reef conservation informed by Palmyra Atoll's resilience. Today, I'll be sharing about what motivated me to pursue graduate school, and specifically this program, and the internship that I conducted with the Nature Conservancy Hawaii and Palmyra. Please note that I will be abbreviating the Nature Conservancy to TNC throughout my presentation. The internship was, as the title noted, interdisciplinary and multifaceted. And I'm excited to share all of the ways that I was able to support the Palmyra team and the TNC Hawaii and Palmyra chapter. I'll discuss my approach and outcomes and how my efforts made an impact on TNC, as well as how the internship has laid the foundation for the next steps in my academic journey. So I knew I wanted to be a marine biologist at the age of 10, and I was very fortunate to spend a significant amount of time in Hawaii as a child. It was here that I fell in love with the ocean, particularly the reef system. There are many stories from my childhood of me chasing sharks around the reef, or being so enraptured by a turtle that I would blindly follow it out to sea and my parents would have to chase me down. While studying marine biology at UC Santa Cruz, I also was working at a local dive shop, and I completed my dive master certification around the same time of receiving my bachelor's degree. After graduating, I moved to Maui to work as a scuba instructor in the fall of 2015. Now, for those of you outside of marine science and the dive community, that may sound like any other fall to you. But for those of us that work around the ocean, you know that I started diving Hawaii's reefs during the peak of the largest mass coral bleaching event that Hawaii has ever seen. I had a front row seat witnessing mass coral mortality and the devastation of watching this place so dear to me vanishing right before my eyes. However, also recovery reefs, and some of these resilient corals have provided me with inspiration and hope. After 5 years in the dive industry and thousands of hours spent underwater exploring and becoming deeply connected to Hawaii's reefs, I felt the kuleana, or responsibility, to continue my education so that I could help protect this precious ecosystem. This led me to the Tropical Conservation Biology and Environmental Science, or TCBES program at UH Hilo, and specifically the internship track, where I would have the opportunity to work with a local management agency and have an impact on coral reef conservation. So I had the incredible honor of conducting my internship with the Nature Conservancy Hawaiian Palmyra. And TNC is a global nonprofit conservation organization that works in over 70 countries. Because TNC is a global organization, it's broken into smaller chapters. So I was working with the Hawaiian Palmyra chapter. Each chapter is then broken into different programs that complete conservation initiatives and management projects that support their local area, as well as the chapter-wide priorities. So I was the Palmyra ecosystem intern within the Palmyra program, and I was brought onto the Palmyra team to support coral reef resilience efforts. As the Palmyra ecosystem intern, I added scientific capacity to the team, led science communication projects, and supported program operations. In addition to working with the Palmyra program, I also worked closely with the communications team on science communication projects to increase awareness and support of the chapter's work. So before I move on, I just want to point out where Palmyra Atoll is, because a lot of people aren't aware of where it's located. So you can see it right here just above the equator, and it's part of the Northern Line Islands in the Central Pacific. Approximately 600 kilometers southwest of Hawaii, and it lies within the Pacific Remote Islands Marine National Monument, which protects nearly 1.3 million square kilometers. Here's a photo of the atoll. So you can see the outer sand and coral island, kind of in the shape of a ring. Some of it is above the surface, which creates the land, and then the rest of it is underwater as part of the reef. And then you can see, of course, the inner lagoon. So I'd now like to spend a moment just acknowledging the value and the significance of the coral reef ecosystem before we dive into Palmyra's resilient reefs. Although coral reefs cover less than 1% of the seafloor, they harbor astounding biodiversity. At least 25% of marine life relies on coral reefs at some point during their life cycle. Many of those critters provide food resources to coastal communities, and globally, and people rely on seafood as their main protein source. Coral reefs are also culturally significant. For example, here in Hawaii, the Kumulipo, or the Hawaiian creation chant, says that the ko'a, which is the coral polyp, is the first life form, and that all life stems from the coral. Coral reefs protect coastal communities from wave and storm damage, and their economic significance is non-trivial at an estimated $3.4 billion per year just in the United States for the food resources, coastal protection, and tourism and recreation opportunities that they provide. Coral reefs also provide significant yet intangible intrinsic value, and I think I can speak for many when I say that coral reefs are valuable and worth protecting. Unfortunately, coral reefs are disappearing from our oceans at an alarming rate. Global climate change is causing sea surface temperatures to rise. In the tropics, these warm temperatures are causing corals to bleach or to lose their symbiotic algae that provides them with the majority of their nutritional resources, often causing them to starve. In many cases, this can lead to coral mortality, particularly in areas that have local stressors, such as pollution, as seen in this photo, sediment pollution, or overfishing, particularly of important functional groups like herbivores. Models predict that bleaching events will be more frequent and more severe in the coming years as global temperatures continue to rise. So in 2015, as I noted, a mass coral bleaching event impacted reefs throughout the Pacific. Up to 70% of reefs in Hawaii exhibited signs of bleaching, and in just 1 year, Hawaii lost 30% of its live coral cover. In contrast, 90% of corals at Palmyra's long-term monitoring sites demonstrated signs of bleaching. At 2017, there was no reduction in live coral cover. These highly resilient corals are providing researchers with information on how healthy corals respond to and recover from bleaching events. Researchers and managers are studying the ecosystems at Palmyra because it provides them with a baseline of what a healthy Pacific Island ecosystem should look like. However, Palmyra isn't completely pristine, and it was actually once heavily impacted, making its story even more interesting. In the 19th century, coconut palms were planted to cultivate copra, and until recently, these introduced trees represented about 40% of the forest canopy. In World War II, a naval base was built on Palmyra, and lagoon dredging, the enlargement and joining of islands, and the creation of a causeway heavily impacted both terrestrial and marine ecosystems. And in this photo, you can actually see the remnants of that causeway. Also introduced at this time, and these guys decimated native seabird populations, although they have been since eradicated and seabird populations are continuing to rise. The atoll is a US territory and is currently jointly managed by TNC and the US Fish and Wildlife Service. And management efforts over the last several decades have helped Palmyra return to a near pristine state. TNC's Palmyra Atoll Rainforest and Reef Resilience Project, also called PARP, aims to remove 95% of introduced coconut palms to restore the atoll's native vegetation. During my internship, they achieved their halfway mark of removing 1 million coconut palms, so only 1 million more to go. Recent research has found that native forests on Palmyra have the ability to store 11.6% more carbon than coconut-dominated forests. The finding demonstrates native ecosystems could have the benefit of mitigating climate change impacts, which is a TNC priority of investing in natural climate solutions. In addition to the carbon storage benefits that native forests provide, they also are preferred habitat for seabirds that nest and roost on the atoll. So in this photo, I've done my best to circle all of the seabirds that I could find nesting in the Pisonia grandis tree. And you can see that they prefer these native broadleaf trees to nest in over the coconut palms. In fact, there are 5 to 10 times more seabirds in native trees than the coconuts. At this point, you're probably asking yourself, Jess, what does this have to do with coral reef conservation? And that is a fantastic question with a really, really interesting answer. So Palmyra's abundant seabirds feed offshore on pelagic prey and they come back to nest and roost atoll. They supply the atoll with pelagic nutrients via their guano or their excrement. This guano not only provides nutrients to the vegetation, but Palmyra's frequent rains wash these nutrients into coastal waters, increasing plankton biomass in areas adjacent to dense seabird populations. So how does this help corals? Although corals are known for obtaining food from their symbiotic algae through photosynthesis, they can also obtain up to 100% of their energy requirements by feeding directly on plankton, known as heterotrophic feeding. This is particularly important during bleaching events when they lose their symbiotic algae. Corals that can feed on plankton have been found to be better at surviving through thermal stress events, and it is believed that this ability to feed heterotrophically contributed to the high survival rate of Palmyra's corals through the severe bleaching in 2015. In contrast to Palmyra, most inhabitants like the do not abundant sea populations. This has been caused largely by human activities such as introduced predators and habitat destruction. The removal of these vital species has resulted in a disruption to the nutrient cycle and reduces the ecosystem services that they provide. Seabirds, although once numbering in the millions on each of the main Hawaiian islands, have become ecologically absent from Hawaii due to their low populations. Although there has been a reduction in naturally derived nutrients, large amounts of anthropogenic sources of nutrients are entering coastal waters around Hawaii through runoff and groundwater discharge. Corals have demonstrated a varied response to nutrient enrichment depending on the source, amount, and type of nutrient added to the system. Overall, it appears that anthropogenic nutrients are negatively impacting corals, while natural nutrient sources, such as seabird guano, are positively impacting the reef. Using Palmyra's intact ecosystem as a model for resilience, research should explain if the addition of natural nutrient subsidies to coral reefs could be used to increase reef resilience in areas that have been more susceptible to previous thermal stress events. As the Palmyra ecosystem intern, I explored this concept through the development of a research project and by creating science communication products to tell the story of reef resilience. The internship that I conducted with TNC can be divided into these 3 areas: operations, communication, and science. And I like to think of these as like the 3 pillars of my internship that supported my overall objective of working within Pacific coral reef conservation. So we'll start with the operations work that I did. And throughout the internship, I helped with operations tasks on the Palmyra team, within the Hawaiian Palmyra chapter, and the Global organization. Some of the projects that I helped the Palmyra team with were creating a new photo organization system and updating their shared photo folders, updating a safety policy used at the Atoll by synthesizing team input. I helped the human resource team by sitting on the hiring committee for conservation science volunteer interviews. I made digital copies of historic photos and maps of Palmyra and designed graphics and logos for the team. For the Hawaiian Palmyra chapter, I created educational exhibits to share information about coral reefs and what TNC is doing to protect them. And then I also scheduled these voices from the field staff presentations at chapter-wide staff meetings. And then globally, I supported the TNC's Reef Resilience Network by conducting needs assessments with 4 Pacific islands to support reef restoration projects. The support I offered to the team to increase efficiency by building faster workflows and organization and shared photo folders, and by helping to move up deadlines because of the extra support that I provided. Members from the Palmyra team have expressed their appreciation for the organization systems that I created, indicating that they have been able to work more efficiently because of my efforts. The team's safety was improved by updating Atoll safety policies, and increased team cohesion occurred through better sharing systems. This is one of the old maps that I digitized, and the team used them actually to identify old World War II structures, which helped with the historical understanding of the atoll. And then this is one of the logos that I designed for the Palmyra Resilient Operations Committee, who is tasked with increasing safety and operations efficiency at the atoll. And they're using the logo on their internal documents and presentations. The overall outcome of the chapter operation tasks supported increased external sharing of the chapter's work. So here you can see one of the 3 signs that I developed that will soon be placed at the Mauna Kea Beach Hotel. And these signs are going to be placed next to 2 aquariums. So the first aquarium is going to be a healthy reef, showing a healthy reef, and the second one will be showing a degraded reef. And the goal of these signs was to educate hotel guests and visitors about the value and the plight of coral reefs, as well as what TNC is doing to restore Hawaii's reefs. The other goal of the signs was to attract potential donors to support to local reef restoration efforts. Since TNC is a nonprofit, they're funded mainly by donor contributions, so directing more people to the philanthropy department directly benefits TNC's conservation work. The staff presentations that I scheduled also helped to increase internal sharing of the chapter's work, because there's so many different projects happening around each island at any given time. This allowed the staff to share updates with the rest of the chapter, increase awareness and support by each team member of what the rest of the chapter is working on. And then the third part of the operations tasks that I helped out with was with the Reef Resilience Network, who is part of the global office. And I helped them conduct needs assessments with 4 Pacific islands. We worked with American Samoa, Sienna Mai, Guam, and Hawaii. And I made little stars on this map here so you could see that we got to work Pacific-wide with this project. So Each of these management agencies on each of the islands had already developed a coral restoration plan with the Reef Resilience Network, and we were coming in to conduct these assessments to identify needs or gaps that needed filled before they could implement their projects. I was tasked with being a note taker and writing up summary reports after each meeting. Overall, we found that there was a need for better sharing of information among restoration teams, as each team felt somewhat isolated from other Pacific Islands conducting similar work, which makes sense when you consider that there's thousands of miles between some of these places, but that's where the Reef Resilience Network came in. Additionally, most teams felt the need to have the support of a restoration expert who could provide training and support during project implementation. By identifying these needs, the Reef Resilience Network was able to support each of these specific jurisdictions and to help them successfully implement their coral restoration projects. I found this to be an incredible learning opportunity because I got to hear about the different reef restoration projects happening in the Pacific, as well as the knowledge and equipment gaps that each team was dealing with. This information is very valuable to me because I want my research to be useful to coral reef managers, so it's helpful to have had the opportunity to hear what some of those gaps and needs are from managers who are on the ground working in reef restoration. Also worked closely with the communications and marketing team, which is another program of TNC's Hawaiʻi and Palmyra chapter. And over the course of my internship, I took on managing the chapter's social media pages, including Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Now, we're not talking about social media in the form of cat videos and pictures of food, but social media that's used to generate community support of TNC projects, to bring awareness to the many partners that we work with, and to educate the community and on local and global conservation issues and their solutions. When I started, I conducted an audit of the pages to learn what was being posted and what sort of content had the highest audience engagement and what the demographics were of the chapter's followers. I then built a strategy identifying key audiences and messages that would guide the type of content I created for the chapter. Once the audit and strategy were complete, I began developing content and posting to all channels, tracking those posts using the marketing software called Koros. I also tracked the chapter's media mentions so that the communications team could share the data with management and board of directors as a measure of outreach and awareness of the chapter's work. And finally, I helped the communications team organize their photos as they're working to upload the chapter's best photos into a database that the global organization has access to. This will allow the global organization to use Hawaiʻi and Palmyra photos in their publications, which will increase the chapter's reach and bring more global recognition to their work. My objectives of increasing engagement and awareness of the Hawaiʻi and Palmyra chapter's work was met as seen through social media engagement, which is a measure of how many people interact with each post. During my time posting to the channels, there were over 22,000 post interactions on approximately 300 posts. Furthermore, I helped to increase awareness by increasing followers 1.6%. I'd like to note that we achieved this organically without running any advertisements at the time. And in the world of social media, we often say that you have to pay to play, meaning that if you want to increase engagement and reach, you have to pay the social media companies to show your posts to more people. So I'm really proud that we were able to reach so many people with our content without paying, further demonstrating success of my objectives. The final pillar of my internship work includes the science projects that I led and supported. The Palmyra program has 2 conservation science volunteers at the Atoll's research station at any given time, and they are responsible for collecting monitoring data and progressing forest restoration projects. The volunteers grow native plant seedlings and cuttings in a nursery, and then they outplant them to areas that have had the coconut palms removed to restore the native forest. During outplanting and monitoring, the volunteers help survival each plant, and this data is useful to determine the success rate of their outplanting efforts. I analyze this data using logistic regression models to learn what variables influence the survival of outplanted seedlings. This analysis will be used by the Palmyra program to help refine planting methods to increase the survival rate of outplanted seedlings. Finally, a large portion of my internship was spent developing a proposal to a federal funding opportunity to fund a research project informed and inspired by Palmyra's resilient reefs. The initial experimental design was to test the conditions under which fish-derived nutrients influence coral growth in a laboratory setting in Hawaii. Pelagic fish waste from commercial fishing activities would be rendered into a solution with similar chemical properties to guano. And we chose to use fish waste as a secondary conservation priority of this project because it's largely available and often unused resource, often up in the landfill. So while guano is the inspiration for this natural nutrient subsidy, it's not available everywhere and because of declining seabird populations. So the fish solution was being tested to replace guano as that natural nutrient subsidy. The fish solution will then be added to aquaria filled with seawater to measure if there is an increase in plankton biomass. And the plankton-enriched seawater will be added to aquaria with coral fragments until plankton biomass within the normal range of Palmyra's lagoon is reached. Next, we would evaluate if corals can utilize plankton-enriched seawater through a simulated bleaching event and measure coral growth and mortality. So for the first 6 months of my internship with TNC, my mentor, Chad Wiggins, connected me with coral reef experts throughout the Pacific to solicit their input on experimental design and gather advice on the various components of this project. I submitted a statement of interest of this federal opportunity in March of 2021 and was invited to submit a full proposal. During proposal development, I secured a location to run the experiments on Hawaiʻi Island, which currently does not have the infrastructure to run this type of coral experiment. I developed a budget with the lab who would be hosting us for the experiment, identified stakeholders, including TNC and the State of Hawaii Division of Aquatic Resources, gathered letters of support, and submitted the full research proposal in July of 2021. The grant writing skills that I gained are super valuable, and I will be using them as I continue on in my academic career. While waiting to hear if our proposal was accepted by the funding agency, I contacted Dr. Megan Donahue at the University of Hawaii at Manoa to discuss conducting this research in her lab as a PhD student. Due to the funding timeline, I decided to leverage this funding opportunity into furthering my education. In February 2022, we learned that our project had made it to the next round and was one of the projects that they hoped to fund. We had the opportunity to respond to reviewers' comments and revise the proposal to transition the project from a master's project here at UH Hilo to a PhD project at UH Manoa. The updated experimental design of the project will maintain the same underlying objective of increasing coral survival through a thermal stress event, and will also focus on investigating the response of corals to different nutrient sources with and without heterotrophic feeding. The change in institution will also provide new opportunities for engagement and co-production, both locally and Pacific-wide, to help mitigate local stressors to reefs to inform active coral reef management. So I'm so thrilled to share that I will be starting a PhD program at UH Manoa this fall. Their marine biology graduate in Dr. Megan Donahue's lab, and the professional internship that I conducted with TNC's Palmyra program and the master's degree from UH Hilo's TCBES program have well prepared me for this next step in my education. The TCBES program's rigorous coursework centered around Hawaiian ecosystems and communities, as well as the training on current methodology and techniques used to study these systems, will be a beneficial foundation in continuing on in my academic journey. The research proposal that I submitted with the support of TNC aided my acceptance into this PhD program at UH Manoa, so I was able to leverage the potentially awarded funding to conduct the research in Dr. Donahue's lab as the initial part of my PhD. The writing, networking, planning, and budgeting skills that I learned while preparing the grant proposal are a necessary foundation to build upon as I further my career in academia. While conducting communications work with TNC, my science skills learned how to potent messages to different audiences. As a researcher, I believe being an effective communicator is necessary to enact community and societal change, and I will continue building these skills as a PhD student. The operations tasks that I completed with TNC gave me insight into the logistics of how a global conservation organization completes its conservation initiatives. And these skills will help me understand how to work with partner organizations, including TNC, during my doctoral work. the TCBES master's degree, and the professional internship with TNC has provided me with a strong foundation to achieve my goal of being a leading conservationist and researcher in Hawaii. My success would not be possible without the incredible support that I've had throughout my time at Hilo and interning with TNC. I must first acknowledge my advisor, Lisa Canali, who told me the first time that I met her that it was her job to make my dream true. I don't know if you remember that, Lisa, but it's something that has stuck with me, and you have certainly succeeded at your job. This program and your students are just so lucky to have you. So big mahalo to you. Thank you to my mentor, Chad Wiggins, for accepting me as an intern into the Palmyra team, and for your guidance, mentorship, and support as we have navigated developing this research project together, and for showing me how to build community. And of course, thank you to the entire Palmyra team who's here. We just had our Palmyra team retreat, for allowing me to be part of the incredible work that you're doing at Palmyra Atoll. It's been really inspiring working with you all. Thanks, of course, to TNC's communications team, Evelyn and Tony, for teaching me how to be an effective science communicator and for providing me with so many opportunities to hone my skills. It has been wonderful working with you both. I'd also like to thank the entire TNC Hawaii Palmyra friendship opportunity. It's really been an honor being involved with the conservation work that this chapter conducts. Thank you to the TCBES faculty and my cohort. What a crazy journey we have all been on together, completing graduate school during a pandemic. So I really appreciate the compassion and grace and care that was shown during this time. I'd also like to thank Dr. Megan Donahue for her support. I think you're here actually, Megan, so for your support and guidance in getting this proposal revised, and for accepting me into your lab. I'm so excited to conduct this research together starting this fall. And finally, a huge mahalo to my friends and family. Thank you for always listening to me rattle on about coral reefs. I promise there is a lot more of it to come. I'd like to close with this piece of Hawaiian wisdom, kokoa uka, kokoa kai, which can be interpreted as in the uplands, so too in the sea, or what we want to the impacts of the sea. Thank you all for being here and for listening, and I would love to take any questions. Lisa, your sound's still off.
Okay, 4.
I was anticipating it.
All right, thank you, Jess, for your talk this evening or this afternoon, and taking us on your journey through your internship experience, and letting us have a glimpse of your future as a PhD student. We really appreciate that. I'd like to open up the floor to questions. So if you have a question, please unmute yourself, and once we get a lineup, just use the raise your hand icon. Questions or comments? So who would like to go first?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. So Jess, of course, I want to know all the things. We've talked about your project plenty of times before, but I'm curious. So let's say that your the implementation and the research turns out to be super promising. It looks like developing your fish serum or whatever it is seems to really help the corals in a lab context. What do you imagine as like a practical way to get that technology or get that type of provisioning out to reefs in sort of like a meaningful way? Sorry, Angela's passing me here.
Thanks, John, for your question. It's a very good question, something that we've thought about a lot. And one of the many reasons I'm so excited this project is transitioning over to UH Manoa and into Dr. Donahue's lab. She's got a lot of connections with different organizations throughout the Pacific. And so we've started contacting people because I think one of the main differences, obviously, from Palmyra and Hawaii is Palmyra is a low-lying atoll with a very different reef system than Hawaiian islands, which are high volcanic islands. And so the direct application, maybe someday we can work on it here in Hawaii, but I think it would apply more to other atoll systems. Say like the Marshall Islands is one place that we're thinking about, or perhaps even Guam, which is a little bit of a different system than here. So we're working on those kind of co-production efforts and building partnerships now, so that if we get these great results, they'll be able to be shared at that time. In terms of here in Hawaii, the place that I could see it possibly being useful is if coral nurseries start going in ocean, and you're growing these corals, and then a bleaching event happens. How do you keep them alive during that bleaching event? So that would be one place I'd love to test it someday, if we get positive results in this initial study, and a possible targeted application for this method of the fish serum, as you call it.
Awesome. All right. Well, super excited to see your path, and yeah, congrats. Awesome job. And yeah, awesome job to everybody. It was great, guys.